They thought firing me on Christmas Eve would break me. Instead, I smiled and told them to check their lease agreement. What they found there made their faces go white, and within 48 hours, they were the ones packing their bags. This is the story of how I went from being their maid to becoming their landlord's worst nightmare, and how one tiny clause in a contract they never read completely destroyed their perfect life. My name is Sarah, and this is how I got my revenge served ice cold on the holiest night of the year. Before I tell you exactly what was in that lease agreement, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you love stories about karma and sweet justice, hit that subscribe button because you won't believe how this ends. Trust me, you'll want to see their faces when everything falls apart. The marble floors of the Wellington penthouse gleamed like ice under the morning sun, and Sarah Mitchell knew every inch of them intimately. For 8 months, she'd scrubbed, polished, and perfected every surface of the sprawling 5,000-square-foot monument to wealth perched on the 23rd floor of Manhattan's most exclusive building. Sarah was 28, with tired eyes that had seen too much struggle and calloused hands that told stories of endless work. She'd come to New York 3 years ago from a small town in Ohio, chasing dreams that had long since faded into the reality of survival. Cleaning houses wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd packed her single suitcase, but it paid the bills. Barely. The Wellingtons were her biggest client. Richard Wellington, 42, was the CEO of Technova Solutions, a software company that had made him obscenely wealthy. His face regularly appeared in Forbes and Business Insider, always wearing that same practiced smile that never quite reached his cold blue eyes. He moved through the penthouse like he owned the air itself, barking orders into his phone, never acknowledging Sarah's presence unless it was to point out a missed spot or a crooked picture frame. His wife, Victoria, was worse. Victoria Wellington was 36 going on 25, at least according to the work she'd had done. She spent her days planning charity galas she used as social climbing opportunities, getting spa treatments, and reminding everyone within earshot that she'd been a runway model before giving it all up to marry Richard. She treated Sarah like a piece of furniture, useful, necessary, but certainly not human. Sarah, the baccarat crystal needs repolishing. I can see fingerprints from across the room, Victoria would say without looking up from her phone, her voice dripping with the kind of disdain only the insecure wealthy could muster. And, honestly, must you make so much noise with the vacuum? Some of us are trying to think. Sarah had been hired in April through an agency. She remembered the interview clearly. Victoria had inspected her like livestock, asking invasive questions about her background, her family, whether she had any criminal associations. Richard hadn't even been present. He'd simply texted his approval based on Victoria's assessment. The pay was decent, $1,500 a week for 6 days of work, 10 hours each day. In New York, it was just enough to share a tiny apartment in Queens with 2 roommates. The discovery had happened 3 months into her employment. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July, sweltering hot, and Sarah had been cleaning Richard's home office, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Richard was in Singapore on business, and Victoria was at some luncheon. The office was always locked when Richard was home, but Victoria had left it open, probably forgetting Sarah was even in the apartment. While dusting the mahogany desk, Sarah had accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As she gathered them up, her eyes caught on a document with bold letters at the top. Residential Lease Agreement, 235 Park Avenue, Unit 23A. Sarah knew she shouldn't read it. It wasn't her business. But something made her pause. Maybe curiosity, maybe the instinct that comes from being invisible for too long. You learn things when people forget you're there. She scanned the pages quickly, her heart pounding. The lease was between Richard Wellington and a landlord named Mrs. Margaret Chen. Monthly rent, $38,000. Sarah's annual salary barely covered 1 month of their rent. The thought made her stomach turn. But then, buried in Section 12, subsection D, she found it. The words seemed to glow on the page. Tenant agrees that any termination of employment of building staff or service providers without minimum 60-day written notice and documented cause shall constitute a material breach of this agreement, resulting in immediate lease termination and forfeiture of security deposit. This clause exists to protect workers in the building and may not be waived. Sarah read it 3 times. Her hands trembled slightly as she carefully placed the papers back exactly as she'd found them. She didn't know why the clause existed or if it would ever matter, but she photographed the page with her phone, just in case. Something in her gut told her to document it. She never mentioned it to anyone. Now, on December 23rd, the penthouse was chaos. Victoria had planned an intimate Christmas Eve gathering for 80 of their closest friends and business associates. Sarah had been working 16-hour days for the past week preparing the apartment for the event. Every surface had to sparkle. Every flower arrangement had to be perfect. Every hors d'oeuvre tray had to be positioned with military precision. "Sarah!" Victoria's shrill voice cut through the apartment. "The caterers will be here in 2 hours, and I still see dust on the chandelier. What exactly have you been doing all morning?" Sarah looked up at the massive crystal chandelier she'd spent 90 minutes cleaning just yesterday. There wasn't a speck of dust on it. The morning light caught the crystals, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the walls. "I'll take care of it right away, Mrs. Wellington," Sarah said quietly, her standard response to everything. "See that you do. And, Sarah," Victoria paused, examining her reflection in a gilded mirror, smoothing her already perfect blonde hair. "Tomorrow is Christmas. I assume you don't have any plans?" "I was hoping to visit my family and—" "Good. I need you here early, 5 a.m. The guests will be leaving late tonight, and the cleanup will be extensive. We're paying you well, after all. The least you can do is be available when we need you." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest, but she nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Wellington." As Victoria clicked away on her Louboutin heels, Sarah stood alone in the cavernous living room, surrounded by wealth she'd never know. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with holiday lights and promise. Somewhere down there, families were preparing for Christmas together. Somewhere, people were valued. But not here. Never here. Sarah didn't know it yet, but in exactly 24 hours, she would remember that lease agreement clause. She would remember every condescending word, every dismissive gesture, every moment they'd made her feel less than human. And she would smile. Sarah's alarm shattered the darkness at 4:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Outside her tiny Queens apartment, the city was still mostly asleep, but she'd learned long ago that the wealthy kept different hours for their staff. She dressed quickly in her standard uniform, black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes, and caught the first subway into Manhattan. The streets were eerily quiet as she walked the final 2 blocks to 235 Park Avenue. A few snowflakes had started falling, catching the streetlights like tiny diamonds. In another life, Sarah might have found it beautiful. Today, it just felt cold. She arrived at 4:52 a.m., 8 minutes early as always. The doorman, Miguel, gave her a sympathetic nod. "Merry Christmas Eve, Sarah. Working the holiday?" "Aren't we all?" she replied with a tired smile. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt longer than usual. When she let herself into the penthouse using her key, the destruction from last night's party hit her immediately. Crystal glasses abandoned on every surface, champagne stains on the white carpets, catering trays scattered across the kitchen like a battlefield. The air still smelled of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and waste. Sarah took a deep breath and got to work. By 9:30 a.m., she'd made significant progress. The kitchen gleamed, the glasses were washed and put away. She was on her knees working on a particularly stubborn champagne stain in the living room carpet when she heard the sharp click of heels. "Well, well, still here, I see." Sarah looked up to find Victoria standing over her, arms crossed. She was already fully made up, wearing a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. But something was different in her expression today, something harder, colder. "Good morning, Mrs. Wellington. I'm just finishing. Stand up when I'm talking to you." Sarah slowly stood, her knees aching from hours of scrubbing. Behind Victoria, she noticed Richard emerging from the hallway, coffee in hand. And then Sarah's heart sank. 3 of their party guests from last night were still there, sitting at the breakfast bar. 2 women in designer athleisure and a man in an expensive suit, all watching with the kind of interest people have when they sense drama. "Mrs. Wellington, is something wrong?" Victoria's perfectly injected lips curved into something approximating a smile. "I'm afraid we need to discuss something rather serious, Sarah. My Cartier bracelet is missing, the diamond one. Richard gave it to me for our anniversary, worth $65,000. The room went silent. Sarah felt her stomach drop. I don't understand." "Don't you?" Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet, performed for her audience. "It was on my nightstand yesterday morning. You cleaned the bedroom, and now it's gone." "I would never—" "We trusted you," Victoria continued, her voice rising with manufactured emotion. "We let you into our home, paid you generously, and this is how you repay us? By stealing?" Richard stepped forward, his face a mask of practiced disappointment. "Sarah, we didn't want to believe it, but Victoria noticed several small items missing over the past few weeks. A watch here, some cash there. We gave you the benefit of the doubt, but this—" He shook his head slowly. "This is too much." Sarah's mind raced. This was calculated, planned. They were setting her up, and she suddenly understood why. No severance pay, no unemployment claims, just a theft accusation to justify immediate termination without consequences. "I have never stolen anything from you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Not ever. You can search my bag right now." "Oh, we're not going to involve the police," Victoria said, quickly, too quickly. "We're not cruel people. We're simply letting you go. Effective immediately. No references, obviously. You can collect your things and leave." The 3 guests whispered among themselves. One of the women had her phone out, probably texting this delicious piece of gossip to her social circle. By noon, every wealthy family on the Upper East Side would hear about the Wellingtons' thieving maid. Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, not embarrassment, but anger, pure, clarifying anger. For 8 months, she'd smiled through their condescension. She'd accepted their dismissive treatment. She'd cleaned up after their excess while barely making rent. And now this, a false accusation to avoid paying her what she was owed. Something clicked in her mind. The lease agreement. Section 12, subsection D. "Mrs. Wellington, Mr. Wellington," Sarah said, calmly reaching for her bag. "Before I go, I'd suggest you check your lease agreement. Section 12, subsection D, specifically." Victoria blinked. "What?" "Your lease agreement. With Mrs. Chen. You might want to read the clause about terminating building staff without notice or documented cause." Richard's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of uncertainty. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that falsely accusing me of theft and firing me without notice might have consequences you haven't considered. Consequences related to your tenancy in this building." "Are you threatening us?" Victoria's voice went shrill. "After stealing from us, you're threatening us?" "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply suggesting you read your lease. Carefully. You might find it enlightening." Sarah moved toward the door, her legs shaking but her head held high. "Oh, and Mrs. Wellington, your bracelet is in your safe, where you put it yourself 2 weeks ago. I watched you do it while I was cleaning the mirrors in your closet." Victoria's face went pale, then red.
How dare you? Merry Christmas, Sarah said quietly, and walked out. Behind her, she heard Richard's voice. Victoria, what the hell is she talking about? What clause? The elevator doors closed before she could hear Victoria's response. Sarah leaned against the cool metal wall, her whole body trembling now. She'd just walked away from her biggest client based on a hunch, a photographed lease clause, and a prayer that it meant what she thought it meant. The elevator descended. Sarah pulled out her phone. She had a call to make. Mrs. Chen, the elderly landlord whose apartment she also cleaned twice a week, needed to know what had just happened. Sarah didn't know if the clause would hold up. She didn't know if Mrs. Chen would care, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Wellingtons had just made a very expensive mistake. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened, and Sarah Mitchell walked out into the snowy Christmas Eve morning with her dignity intact and a plan forming in her mind. Behind her, 23 floors up, Richard and Victoria Wellington were about to learn a lesson that no amount of money could unlearn. Some people, it turns out, are far more dangerous than they appear.
The photograph on Sarah's phone told a story that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. It had been a sweltering Tuesday afternoon when Sarah had accidentally discovered the Wellingtons' lease agreement. After photographing Section 12, subsection D, she'd carefully replaced the documents and finished cleaning Richard's office, her mind spinning with questions. Why would a lease agreement contain protection for building staff? It seemed unusual, almost personal. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the most unexpected way. Sarah had just started a second job, cleaning apartments for elderly residents in the same building, extra income she desperately needed. Her new client was Mrs. Margaret Chen, who lived in a modest 3-bedroom unit on the 14th floor. The contrast to the Wellingtons' ostentatious penthouse couldn't have been starker. Mrs. Chen was 78 years old, a tiny woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, and eyes that missed nothing. Her apartment was filled with photographs spanning decades, black and white images of a younger woman in elegant dresses, colorful snapshots of children and grandchildren, and everywhere plants. Orchids, peace lilies, jade plants, each one meticulously cared for. "You're the girl who cleans for the Wellingtons," Mrs. Chen said on her first visit, not as a question, but a statement. She was sitting in a wing-back chair by the window, sunlight streaming across her lap where a Persian cat dozed contentedly. "Yes, ma'am. How did you know?" Mrs. Chen's smile was gentle but knowing. "This is my building, dear. All 15 units. I know everyone who works here, and I make it my business to know who employs them and how they're treated." Sarah's hands stilled on the furniture she was dusting. "Your building? You own it?" "Bought it in 1982 with my late husband. Now it's just mine." Mrs. Chen gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit. Let's have tea before you clean. I need the company more than I need the dusting." That afternoon began a friendship that transcended their employer-employee relationship. Every Tuesday and Friday, Sarah would arrive at 2 p.m., and before any cleaning happened, there was tea. Mrs. Chen would talk and Sarah would listen, grateful for the kindness of someone who actually saw her as human. It was during their 4th tea session that Mrs. Chen told her story. "My husband, James, was a real estate developer. Brilliant man. We built this empire together. 7 buildings across Manhattan. I managed the properties while he handled acquisitions." Her expression darkened. "In 1995, I hired a young woman named Elena to clean our penthouse. Beautiful girl, 23, from Guatemala. James was 52. Sarah listened quietly, sensing the pain in the older woman's voice. "The affair lasted 8 months. I found out when Elena became pregnant. James fired her immediately. No severance, no references, just gone. He wanted to erase the evidence of his mistake. Elena was 4 months pregnant, alone in a country where she barely spoke the language, with no job and no money. What happened to her?
Sarah asked softly. I found her, gave her money, helped her get back to Guatemala where she had family. But the guilt never left me, that I couldn't protect her from my own husband's cruelty. Mrs. Chen met Sarah's eyes. James had a heart attack 2 years later. Before he died, I made him watch as I had our lawyers draft new lease agreements for every property we owned. Special clauses, protections. Sarah's breath caught. Section 12, subsection D. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. You've read it. I saw the Wellingtons lease by accident. I didn't understand why it was there. It's in every single lease across all my properties. Any tenant who terminates employment of building staff, cleaners, doormen, maintenance workers, anyone without 60 days' notice and documented cause forfeits their lease immediately. No appeals, no extensions. Mrs. Chen's voice was steel. I will not own buildings where workers are treated as disposable. I've evicted 4 tenants in the past 20 years for violations. Each time, I've slept soundly. Sarah's mind raced back to the Wellingtons, to Victoria's casual cruelty and Richard's dismissive arrogance. Is it legally enforceable? Absolutely. I have the best real estate lawyers in New York. Every tenant signs acknowledging they've read and understood all clauses. It's ironclad. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Why do you ask, dear? Are the Wellingtons treating you poorly? They're difficult, Sarah admitted carefully. Demanding, condescending, but I need the job. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. If they ever cross the line, Sarah, you come to me immediately. I don't care how much rent they pay. No one in my buildings treats staff like garbage. Do you understand? Sarah nodded, filing the information away. Over the following months, her friendship with Mrs. Chen deepened. The older woman was lonely, and Sarah was kind, a rare combination that created genuine affection. They talked about everything. Sarah's dreams of going back to school, Mrs. Chen's late daughter who died of cancer, the changing face of New York, the small joys and large sorrows of life. And Sarah was careful. So careful. Every interaction with the Wellingtons, she documented. She kept a journal with dates, times, and details of their treatment. She saved every text message Victoria sent at midnight, demanding she come in early. She photographed the schedule showing her regular work hours. When Richard had shorted her paycheck by $200 in October, claiming she'd broken a vase she'd never touched, she documented that too. She didn't know why she was building this file. Some instinct told her to protect herself, to be ready. Now standing in the falling snow on Christmas Eve morning, her phone in her hand and Mrs. Chen's number on the screen, Sarah understood. All those months of documentation, all those carefully saved messages and photographs, they were about to become her weapon. Sarah pressed dial. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring. Sarah, why are you calling so early? Is everything all right? Mrs. Chen, Sarah said, her voice steady by the adrenaline coursing through her. I need to tell you what just happened at the Wellingtons' apartment, and I need to know if you're willing to enforce Section 12, subsection D. There was a pause. Then Mrs. Chen's voice came through, sharp and clear and absolutely certain. Tell me everything. Sarah began to talk. And 23 floors above her, the Wellingtons' perfect Christmas Eve was about to shatter like expensive crystal hitting marble floors.
Sarah sat in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from 235 Park Avenue, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, Mrs. Chen listened intently, her aged face growing harder with each detail of Sarah's story. They accused you of theft on Christmas Eve? In front of witnesses? Mrs. Chen's voice was quiet, but Sarah recognized the fury beneath it, the same controlled anger she'd heard when Mrs. Chen spoke about her late husband's betrayal. Yes, ma'am. A Cartier bracelet they claimed was worth $65,000. I never touched it. They did it to avoid paying severance or unemployment. She pulled out her phone, opening the folder of documentation she'd been keeping. I have everything here. my employment contract, text messages showing my regular schedule, proof of payment, and photographs I took this morning, timestamped at 4:52 a.m. when I arrived for work. Mrs. Chen scrolled through the evidence, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much cruelty in one lifetime. You were fired without notice, without cause, and with false accusations designed to damage your reputation and future employment prospects? Yes. And they did this while living in my building under a lease they clearly never bothered to read thoroughly? Mrs. Chen's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. How profoundly stupid. She pulled out her own phone and dialed, "Robert, it's Margaret Chen. I need you at 235 Park Avenue within the hour. Bring eviction paperwork for Unit 23A. Yes, the Wellingtons. Section 12, subsection D violation. I have full documentation." She paused, listening. "I don't care that it's Christmas Eve. They didn't care when they fired their maid on Christmas Eve. 1 hour, Robert." The Wellingtons' intimate holiday party was in full swing. 80 guests filled the penthouse. Tech moguls, socialites, politicians, and celebrities all mingling under the clean chandelier, drinking champagne Sarah had polished glasses for just hours before. Victoria was holding court by the fireplace, telling an animated story about her recent trip to Saint-Tropez, when the doorbell rang. Richard, slightly drunk on expensive scotch, opened the door to find a man in his 60s wearing a wool coat and carrying a leather briefcase. "Can I help you? This is a private party." "Richard Wellington? I'm Robert Matsumoto, attorney for Mrs. Margaret Chen, the owner of this property. I need to speak with you and your wife immediately." The music seemed to dim. Conversations faltered. Victoria appeared at Richard's side, her smile frozen. "I'm sorry, but whatever this is, it can wait until after the holidays." "It cannot." Robert stepped inside uninvited, pulling documents from his briefcase. "As of 10:30 this morning, you violated Section 12, subsection D of your lease agreement by terminating the employment of Sarah Mitchell, building staff member, without 60-day notice and without documented cause. Furthermore, you made false accusations of theft to justify said termination. Per the terms of your lease, this constitutes immediate grounds for eviction." The color drained from Richard's face. "What the hell are you talking about?" Robert handed him the papers. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Your security deposit of $114,000 is forfeit. All terms are outlined here. Mrs. Chen wishes you a Merry Christmas." The room had gone completely silent. 80 pairs of eyes watched as Victoria snatched the papers from Richard's hands, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then pure rage. "This is insane. You can't evict us for firing a maid." "I can, and I am." Robert's voice was clinical. "You signed the lease acknowledging you read and understood all terms. This clause exists specifically to protect workers from the kind of treatment you displayed this morning. 3 witnesses heard you make false theft accusations. Mrs. Mitchell has documentation proving her scheduled work hours and your termination without cause." After Robert left and the guests scattered, whispering, texting, already spreading the story, Richard and Victoria sat surrounded by their lawyer's grim face on a video call. "Is this real? Can she actually do this?" Their lawyer, Marcus Feldman, looked exhausted even through the screen. "I've reviewed the lease and the clause. It's ironclad, completely legal, and frankly, brilliant legal writing. Margaret Chen's team clearly learned from decades of case law. You don't have grounds to fight this." "There has to be something." Victoria's voice was shrill. "We pay $38,000 a month." "Which is irrelevant. You violated a material term of the lease. Mrs. Chen has full discretion to enforce it." Marcus paused. "My honest advice?
Apologize profusely, offer the maid a massive settlement, and pray Mrs. Chen shows mercy. Richard's call to Mrs. Chen went straight to voicemail. His email offering Sarah $100,000 in severance for the misunderstanding went unanswered. Victoria's attempt to show up at Mrs. Chen's apartment was blocked by building security. At 4 p.m., Richard tried a different approach: intimidation. His lawyer sent a letter threatening legal action for unlawful eviction and business interference. Mrs. Chen's response came 30 minutes later, a single paragraph that Robert read to them over the phone. Mr. Wellington, 29 years ago, my husband fired a pregnant housekeeper to hide his affair. He threw her away like trash to protect his reputation. I have spent 30 years ensuring that no one in my properties could do the same. Your threats mean nothing. Your money means nothing. You fired Sarah Mitchell on Christmas Eve with false accusations to avoid paying her what she was owed. You will leave my building, and you will remember that every person you consider beneath you is in fact a human being. Perhaps next time you'll read your lease. The story leaked. Of course it leaked. 80 party guests all witnessed the eviction notice. By Christmas dinner, tech blogs were reporting it. By evening, Twitter was ablaze. Richard's business rivals, smelling blood, amplified the story. Technova's CEO evicted for abusing staff on Christmas Eve. Millionaire couple loses penthouse after firing a maid. Here's why. The lease clause protecting workers that just cost 2 tech executives everything. Richard's phone exploded with calls from board members, investors, and PR teams. His reputation as a visionary leader was crumbling in real time, replaced with entitled elitist who abuses workers. The Wellingtons spent Boxing Day desperately house hunting, but word had spread through Manhattan's tight-knit luxury real estate community. 3 landlords rejected their applications outright. 2 brokers stopped returning their calls. No one wants to rent to people who treat staff like garbage. It's a liability. One broker finally admitted. Sarah stood across the street from 235 Park Avenue, a cup of coffee warming her hands, watching as moving trucks pulled up to the building. Through the falling snow, she could see Richard and Victoria supervising movers, both of them haggard and furious, loading their expensive possessions like refugees fleeing disaster. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen. They're out by noon. Come by tomorrow at 2 p.m. We need to talk about your future. Sarah smiled, a real smile, and took a sip of her coffee. It tasted like Christmas morning. It tasted like justice. 23 floors up, Victoria Wellington was crying into her phone, while Richard screamed at movers to be careful with a painting. Their perfect life, their carefully constructed world of privilege and cruelty, was being packed into boxes and driven away. And Sarah Mitchell, the maid they'd tried to destroy, stood in the snow and watched karma work in real time. The unraveling was complete, but Sarah's story, it was just beginning.
Sarah knocked on Mrs. Chen's door with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The events of the past few days felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. She'd spent Christmas Day with her roommates, checking her phone obsessively as the story spread across social media. By evening, she'd received calls from 3 news outlets wanting interviews. She'd declined them all. Mrs. Chen opened the door herself, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing an elegant burgundy cardigan. Sarah, come in, dear. I've made jasmine tea. They settled into their usual spots by the window. The city stretched below them, glittering with post-holiday lights. Mrs. Chen's Persian cat, Ming, curled up in Sarah's lap immediately, purring. I want to thank you, Sarah began, for believing me, for enforcing that clause. I know evicting tenants isn't... Mrs. Chen held up a hand. Sarah, I didn't do this as a favor. I did it because it was right. That clause exists for exactly this situation, to protect people like you from people like them. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. But I do want to discuss something with you. Your future.
Sarah's heart beat faster. My future? I'm 78 years old. I own 7 buildings across Manhattan, 43 residential units total. For years, I've managed them myself with a small team. But I'm tired. Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp and assessing. I need someone I trust. Someone who understands what these properties represent. Someone who will enforce my worker protection clauses and maintain the standards I've built. I don't understand. I'm offering you a position as my property manager, Sarah, full-time. Salary of $75,000 to start, with bonuses and full benefits. You'll oversee all 7 buildings, manage tenant relations, coordinate with maintenance staff, and most importantly, ensure that every worker in my properties is treated with dignity and respect. Sarah's teacup rattled against its saucer. She set it down carefully, her hands shaking. Mrs. Chen, I'm a house cleaner. I don't have property management experience or... You have something better. You have integrity. You have empathy. And you've proven you have courage. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. I can teach you property management. I cannot teach someone to care about people. You already do. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. $75,000. Benefits? A real career, not just survival. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Mrs. Chen smiled warmly, something she rarely did. Good. You start January 2nd. We'll spend the first month training you, introducing you to all the buildings and tenants. You'll have an office, a company phone, and full authority to make decisions in my name. She paused, including tenant approvals and evictions.
Sarah stood in her new office, a small but professional space in Mrs. Chen's primary building, reviewing tenant applications on her computer. She wore a navy blazer and felt like an imposter, but Mrs. Chen kept reminding her that confidence came with time. Her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach flip. Wellington. Richard. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Sarah Mitchell speaking? Sarah, it's Richard Wellington. His voice was different, smaller, missing the arrogant edge she'd known for 8 months. I'm calling because we're applying for an apartment in one of Mrs. Chen's buildings, 447 Amsterdam Avenue. Sarah pulled up the application on her screen. There it was. Wellington, Richard, and Victoria, applying for a 3-bedroom unit at $22,000 a month, a significant downgrade from their former penthouse. The irony was almost poetic. I see your application, Sarah said neutrally. The listing agent said all applications go through the property manager for approval. I didn't realize... He trailed off, and she could hear Victoria's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Look, I know things ended badly. What Victoria did was wrong. The accusations were wrong. We're sorry. Sarah let the silence stretch. She thought about those 8 months of condescension, Victoria's dismissive tone, Richard's complete disregard for her humanity, the humiliation of being accused of theft in front of strangers, the cruelty of being fired on Christmas Eve. But she also thought about Mrs. Chen's words. This isn't about revenge, Sarah. It's about teaching people that actions have consequences. Mr. Wellington, I'll review your application fairly, just like every other applicant. However, I should inform you that all tenants in Mrs. Chen's properties are required to read and acknowledge specific lease clauses regarding treatment of building staff. Given your history, there will be additional documentation required, including references from previous landlords and any staff you've employed in the past 3 years. He heard him swallow hard. Understood. We'll provide whatever you need. I'll be in touch within 5 business days with a decision. Paused.
Mr. Wellington, the bracelet Victoria accused me of stealing, did you ever find it? A long silence. Then, it was in the safe, where she'd put it, just like you said. I see. I'll be in touch. Sarah hung up and stared at the application. After a moment, she picked up her phone and called Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen, the Wellingtons are applying for the Amsterdam Avenue property. I know. I saw the application. Mrs. Chen's voice was amused. What are you going to do? I'm going to approve it. Really? After everything? Sarah smiled. Yes, but with conditions. They'll have the strictest lease terms we offer. They'll be required to attend a mandatory meeting about tenant responsibilities and worker treatment. And if they violate any clause at all, they're out immediately. No second chances. Mrs. Chen laughed, a sound like wind chimes. You're learning, Sarah. Sometimes the best revenge isn't rejection, it's making sure they never forget the lesson. February 3rd, moving day. Sarah happened to be conducting a building inspection at 447 Amsterdam Avenue when the Wellingtons' moving truck arrived. She stood in the lobby with her clipboard, professional and poised, as Richard and Victoria walked in with boxes. Victoria saw her first. Her face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: recognition, humiliation, anger, resignation. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Richard set down his box and approached. Sarah, I didn't expect... are you here for... I'm the property manager, Mr. Wellington. I conduct regular building inspections. Sarah met his eyes calmly. Welcome to 447 Amsterdam. Your lease packet is with the front desk. Please review Section 12, subsection D, carefully. I'm sure you remember it. She walked past them to the elevator, feeling their stares on her back. As the elevator doors closed, she caught Victoria's reflection in the polished doors, a woman who finally understood that the people she'd traded as invisible were in fact the ones who held all the power. Sarah sat in her office, reviewing end-of-quarter reports. She'd successfully managed 2 tenant turnovers, negotiated new maintenance contracts, and implemented a worker appreciation program across all 7 buildings. The doormen loved her, the cleaning staff trusted her, the tenants respected her. Mrs. Chen had given her a raise. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. So proud of you, sweetheart. Never forget where you came from, but never stop reaching for where you're going. Sarah looked at the framed photograph on her desk, the one she had taken of Section 12, subsection D, all those months ago. The clause that had changed her life, the words that had given her power when she'd felt powerless. She thought about that Christmas Eve morning, standing in the snow after being fired, deciding whether to make the call to Mrs. Chen. It would have been so easy to just walk away, to accept defeat, to believe that people like the Wellingtons always won. But she hadn't. She'd smiled, she remembered the lease, and she fought back with the only weapon she had: knowledge, documentation, and a landlord who valued human dignity over rental income. They fired me on Christmas Eve, thinking I was powerless. They thought I was just a maid, disposable, forgettable, beneath their concern. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. I smiled when they fired me because I knew something they didn't. I knew about a lease clause they'd never bothered to read. I knew about a landlord who'd spent 30 years protecting people like me from people like them. And I knew that documentation, patience, and courage could turn a victim into a victor. Within 48 hours, they went from evicting me to being evicted themselves. Within 6 months, I went from scrubbing their floors to managing their building. The woman they tried to destroy with false accusations became the person who approved their housing application, and believe me, they read every single word of their lease this time. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about knowing your worth, protecting yourself, and understanding that power doesn't always belong to the people with the most money. It belongs to the people who pay attention, who document everything, and who refuse to be invisible. So here's my message to everyone watching. Read your contracts, know your rights, document everything, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you don't matter, because the people who seem powerless today might be the ones holding all the cards tomorrow. If you loved this story of karma and justice, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever experienced sweet revenge against someone who underestimated you? I want to hear your stories. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who's being mistreated at work or made to feel small, share this video with them. Sometimes people need to be reminded that they're more powerful than they think. The Wellingtons learned their lesson the hard way. Don't let anyone in your life make the mistake of underestimating you. You're stronger than you know. Until next time, remember, karma doesn't always come when you want it, but it always comes right on time. This is Sarah Mitchell, signing off. And yes, they're still my tenants. And yes, they say please and thank you now. Merry Christmas, Mr. and Mrs. Wellington. I hope you enjoy your new apartment.